Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kyle. I'm the CEO at A-Team, and today we have a very special webinar with a special guest who's kind enough to join us. We have Paul Niven, a noted author, strategist, consultant, and actually an advisor to our company. So, Paul, thank you again for joining us. Glad to have you on this webinar.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kyle. Thank you so much.
We have about 37 people in here right now, so as people are kind of trickling in, here's some more background on you, Paul, but I also wanted to kick off with a little poll for the attendees that we do have and see what everybody's experience level is with OKRs before we get started, just so we know what audience we have with us. So I'm going to launch a poll right now for everybody and go ahead and submit those responses as you get a chance. Love to hear what your company's experience level are with OKRs, whether that's a lot of experience, really familiar, whether you're just getting started. Hopefully everybody's heard of them if they're on this webinar. I think it might be a little bit too high level if you've never heard of them. Keep it open for about maybe 40 seconds here. All right, getting those final votes in. I'll close that up. So it looks like that's good. We have about half the people on this webinar have some experience, but they're still learning how to use them effectively, which is great. I think this webinar is going to be very helpful for you guys. And for those of you with little or no experience, maybe Paul can convince you that there's something that you should give a try in your company. So with that, Paul, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks, Kyle. I noticed we have 3% of people who've never heard of OKR, so obviously they dialed into the wrong webinar, perhaps. But maybe we can convince them. Yeah. We can convince them to become OKR's devotees. We'll see. But yeah, just thanks again, Kyle, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. Brief background on me. I think the first bullet there is the most important of anything on the page. I was a practitioner before I became a consultant and writer. I'm originally Canadian, and I worked for a company in Canada that was very good at developing strategy, but very poor at executing it until we finally started doing what we're going to be talking about today. We translated our strategy into objectives, we attached key results, and forgive the cliche word, but the situation or the outcome really was transformational. We improved broken processes, we had customer engagement scores higher than we ever had before, financial results improved, but the big aha for me is that we had asked people before we did all this, do you understand the company strategy and see how you fit in? And before we did this, we had numbers in the low teens, and fast forward a couple of years later, we were up in the high 70s. And that's when I knew we were really onto something, because people were saying, for the first time, really, I understand where this company is going and I can see how I fit in. And that, again, is just such a powerful flywheel of momentum that I realized this is really something. And so I've devoted my professional life to it, as you can see here on the slide. I worked originally in a field called Balanced Scorecard. Some of you may be familiar with that. Very similar DNA to OKRs. Written 6 books on these topics that have now been translated into 15 languages around the world, which I'm really proud of, and gives me a chance to work with organizations around the world. I speak at conferences and seminars, and I've included just a few of a very small sample of the clients that we work with. And of course, when you're a consultant, you list all the names that everybody would be familiar with, and these are some of our household names, but and there are lots of others. But of course, we work with all sorts of companies, or organizations, I should say, because although we're all different, what unites us is that we should all have a strategy or plans, and we should have the means to execute them, and that's what OKRs do. So, been doing this for 20 years, and I hope to do it for another 20 at least.
That's awesome. It's great that you have that firsthand experience. You've seen how powerful this can be in a company and really turn it around and get everybody aligned.
Absolutely, yeah. Good.
Awesome.
All right, so what I'm going to talk about today during the webinar is really 3 things. We wanted to keep this, Kyle and I talked about the agenda, and we wanted to keep it really focused for everyone and make it as practical as possible. So I'm going to start with OKR's best practices and just some of the really high-level things that I think you have to get right in order to implement OKRs effectively in your organization. Then we'll talk about how OKRs are evolving, and that is one of the things I love about OKRs. It is evolving. And so I'm going to talk about 2 areas in particular that I see as changing fairly rapidly, why they're changing, and what the future might look like. And we'll conclude today with some OKR tips, tricks, and hacks, just some things I'd like you to think about, again, to help you effectively implement OKRs, and some things you may not have thought about that I think can provide some shortcuts that you'll find effective. And I know Kyle will be keeping me honest here. He'll be asking me some questions as we go along, and of course we invite you to ask questions too, which we'll be logging, and we'll answer those after the presentation portion of the webinar. So Kyle, I think we can jump in.
All right, let's get to it.
All right. So we'll start with OKR's best practices, and I've got a half dozen here that I want to talk to you about in no particular order, but these are all things, of course, that I've seen from my experience. Again, over 200 global implementations, so I've seen a lot. And the first thing I want to talk about is creating context for your OKRs. And OKRs should not be created in a vacuum. It just would not be effective to go to a team and say, hey, tell me what your objective is and how you're going to hold yourself accountable for key results. We really do need context. It's interesting, there's been a lot of research done on creativity, and people tend to be more creative when they actually have some boundaries around the creativity. And that's what we're doing here with OKRs. We want some boundaries so that we can develop effective OKRs. And first of all, if you're at the organizational level and you're creating corporate OKRs, obviously the first condition is that you have a strategy, because OKRs are all about executing strategy and translating them into objectives and key results that you can use to gauge the effectiveness of that execution. So ideally we need a strategy. If you're at the team or department level of an organization, a little bit lower down, I really suggest that you start by creating a team mission. And you may or may not ever have done that before, but it really does help provide context. And I really urge my clients to go beyond just writing down your job description. We all know that, but why is it what you do? Why does it matter to the company? How does it make a difference for customers? Really think about, the importance of your function in the organization. Why do you exist? And that, again, will help you create context for your OKRs, because, again, we're not creating them in a vacuum, but we want to make sure they're aligned with what you're doing and how that you can ultimately help the customer in their journey. So step one when you're developing OKRs is to create that context. So at the company level, we would expect that you have a strategy we can execute, perhaps a longer term vision. And at the team level, definitely start with that mission statement. So I'll create some context for you. Second thing I wanted to talk about is filling key OKR roles. And we hear a lot in the literature out there about OKRs being a very light work framework. And that is, of course, important, but that doesn't mean it precludes us from having some key roles that have to be filled to make sure that implementations run smoothly and effectively. And I've highlighted 3 here for you to consider. The first is executive sponsor. And anybody who's ever engaged in any kind of change program knows that you need executive sponsorship. I've had a chance to be a part of conferences around the world over the last 20 years, and regardless of the topic, the one thing I've always noticed consistently is that people always talk about the importance of executive sponsorship. It's, as you know, it's critical to any kind of organizational change effort. So we want a sponsor that's going to really, they're going to define the success criteria of the OKRs program. Maybe most critically, they're going to communicate why the organization is engaging in OKRs. I think that's so important. We obviously live in an era now of you might call it change fatigue. We see so much going on that it's incumbent upon our executive sponsor to say, hey, everybody, just stop, take a breath here, and realize this is why we're actually investing in OKRs, and here's how we think they can help you as an organization. So really, really critical there. The executive sponsor obviously can update the executive team on progress. They can improve funding for this. They can work with the internal champion and the ambassadors that I'll talk about in just a second to make sure that everything's moving freely and smoothly within the organization. And perhaps most importantly, they can simply make sure that OKRs get used, right? So they can make sure that the agenda at the executive level is one that is actually using OKRs to monitor progress. I know that sounds like common sense, but believe me, it happens sometimes that OKRs are developed, they look really good, but they're never used. So executive sponsor, really critical. OKRs champion. So I get asked the question a lot, what does it take to succeed with OKRs? And of course, there's some obvious answers. You have to get good, productive, effective OKRs. You have to be able to write a good, technically proficient OKR. But when I look at my database of clients, again, over the last 20 years, spanning 200 organizations, those that really succeed, they all have something in common, and that's a dedicated OKRs champion. This role is absolutely a linchpin to your success because, again, OKRs, it's great to have beneficial software like Kyle's and A-Team, But as Kyle will, I'm sure, will agree with me, just plugging in software is not going to guarantee success with an OKR's program. Absolutely. You need that person who's the logistical and philosophical heart of the program, the champion. So this person, he or she, would liaise closely with the executive team to make sure that, pardon me, OKRs are being implemented as the executive sponsor has described. They're going to be keeping track of all the latest training, all the latest material, hopefully attending webinars like this, reading the books. So again, they can really be the again, logistical and philosophical heart of the program. They're going to manage the program budget if you have one. They're going to facilitate ambassador meetings that I'll talk about in just a second. But when you boil it right down, the OKRs champion is really the person, the change agent that's leading this internally, and it's a critical role for the organization. So you don't necessarily have to have experience with OKRs to fulfill this role. We've had a lot of people that come in that don't do that, but you have to be enthusiastic. Some background in measurement is definitely important. Ideally, reporting to C-level is beneficial. But what we find perhaps most important is someone who's a good communicator and really believes in this and is passionate about it. So that's just a few of the things to look for in a good OKRs champion. The last role I'll talk briefly about is that of an OKR ambassador. And so if you're an organization of any substantial size, you'll want to roll OKRs out across the organization to the team or department level. And we suggest that you have what we call ambassadors. So consider an ambassador almost a super user within their team, so that when questions come up about how to write an OKR, what a good OKR looks like, the ambassador can be the first line of quality assurance, if you will. And then they can, of course, get further information from the champion. But the ambassador, again, is your first line of QC. We also find in successful organizations, it's interesting, Kyle, that organizations that use these ambassadors will have the ambassadors get together, even if it's just once a quarter, share best practices, learnings across the organization. And this is doing a couple of things. Of course, it's, again, seeding those best ideas, so to make sure that they get shared. But it's also increasing the buy-in and the support for OKRs across the organization by, again, sharing these best practices with these ambassadors. So what do we look for with an ambassador? Well, obviously somebody who has influence within their team, maybe even beyond their job title. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell's work, and in one of his books, he describes people that are connectors. So they have more power than their job title would convey. And sometimes the best OK ambassadors are certainly representative of that trait. Experience with measurement systems definitely helps, but again, not unlike our OKRs champion, we want the ambassador to be enthusiastic about OKRs. So before you even launch, before you put a marker to flip chart to start drafting OKRs, consider whether or not you fill these roles, because they will be critical to your OKR success.
Yeah, and Paul, we see that too with software, which is that you can't just buy a piece of software and hope that by giving your executives an account, or giving your project managers an account, they're all of a sudden going to fill these roles. You really need the context and the culture beforehand, and then the software can facilitate that. But if you don't have the context and culture there already, it's going to be tough to get the buy-in and to get the engagement that you want.
That's really well said, Kyle, and it's great to hear that coming from you, that to recognize that software is really an enabler, and to enable effectively, you need these roles that we talked about. So that's great. So I'll go from that, which is really a kind of a change management idea, to my next bullet point, which is don't write sloppy objectives. So I'm getting a little more pedantic here, but again, I've literally seen probably thousands of OKRs over the last several years, and you know, I can tell right away whether somebody's taking the exercise seriously by the way the OKR is written. And when I talk about sloppy objectives, I mean, you know, examples like this: be more efficient and effective in the next quarter. That is a very, very vague objective. You know, we can define the word efficient in 1,000 different ways, and the word effective in an equally large number of ways. I always tell my clients that specificity is your friend with OKRs. The more specific you can make an objective, the better it will be for you. And obviously, the easier it will be to develop a key result, because if you're being very concise and, again, specific with your objective, you can isolate a key result that actually translate that objective into action. So really try to be careful with your objectives, and every word matters when you're writing an objective. So you know, you have to think about, okay, be more efficient. Well, what do I mean by efficient? And start asking yourself why that is important. Look for concrete examples of what efficiency might look like in your organization. And if you keep doing that, eventually you'll get to something that is, again, is more specific and more representative of the problem that you're trying to solve, which is, you know, actually more important. So I think it's fine if you're brainstorming objectives to start something like this. And I hear a lot of this in my client workshops. Hey, we have to be more efficient. We have to be more effective. We have to be more productive. That's a great way to start a conversation, but a poor way to end one. So we always want to break it down. So, so just be careful when you're writing objectives that you're not using words like efficient, effective. And if you do, make sure you translate them with good, solid key results.
Yeah, we call it wordsmithing. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of practice, and it improves over time, but you got to put that effort in.
It absolutely does, right? And again, that's why I say it's fine to start with something like this, but again, hone it down when you get to your final OKRs. So interesting, Kyle, I'm sure you hear this a lot from everybody who calls you, but everyone who talks to us is saying, one of the first things they'll say is, we need more cross-functional collaboration. We need more alignment in our organization. So we want to make sure we introduce that process into OKR's development. And we always talk about two types of alignment. The first is vertical. And I think that's a little bit more straightforward. When we talk about vertical alignment, we just mean that anytime you write an OKR, you want to make sure it adheres to the strategy of the organization. So if you're really focusing on acquiring more customers, we would expect your OKRs in some way to help assist with that. If you're focused more on developing better relationships or lowering your costs, we would expect the OKRs to align with that. So strategic or vertical alignment. But I think the more interesting is definitely the second one we've got here on our list, and that is horizontal alignment. Again, virtually every client I've talked to has said we need more cross-functional collaboration, and OKRs can help with that, but unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand I can wave over your organization. You really have to build this into the process. So we do that by encouraging our clients when they're developing their OKRs to simply note, who is it in your organization that you're going to require assistance from to achieve this OKR? Build that right into the process. So, Kyle, if I'm writing a new OKR and I might need your help to achieve it, I write that down. But it doesn't stop there, obviously. I don't send you an email. We don't have a phone call. We have to have a sit-down meeting. We have a face-to-face meeting where I say, Kyle, I need your help with this OKR. Do you have the bandwidth to help me? And you might say, well, no, Paul, I've got my own OKRs. I'm going to be slammed this quarter. I simply can't help you with that OKR. Well, then something happens that a lot of people might say, well, this is a problem, but it's not. And that is escalation, right? So escalating is not a bad word. If you and I come to loggerheads, Kyle, we can't agree on whether or not we can share an OKR, we take it to our bosses. And this is a good thing because it forces them to make a priority decision, a strategic priority decision on where they should place their resources. So in this case, they might say, you know what, Kyle, what you're working on this quarter is strategically more important to us. Paul, what you've got is still important, but just scale it back. Maybe ramp down your targets and your key result a little bit, or consider another objective. But the point of all this, Kyle, and everyone obviously who's listening today, we have to build horizontal alignment right into the process. So that starts by documenting dependencies when you're writing OKRs and having actual sit-down meetings with people where you actually talk them through and determine whether or not you can actually help one another with the OKR.
Yeah.
Sure, Kyle, you've seen this too in working with the clients that you see every day.
Absolutely. This is one of the big areas where we've identified, I think probably from conversations with you too, Paul, as like a big shortcoming in a team from like last year, that we've now been putting effort into the product to enable some of this collaboration, this cross-functional collaboration, to facilitate it within the platform, but also to kind of kickstart some of these conversations around OKRs, because not all the conversations happen in the platforms. A lot of it, you got to get face-to-face, you got to get meetings about this stuff, but software can obviously help facilitate those or help bubble them up to the important people that need to know about them.
Yeah, no, it's really well said, Kyle. So let's say you've done everything we've talked about so far. You've filled all the roles, you've written good technically proficient OKRs, you've aligned yourself vertically and horizontally. What do we do then? Well, you want to talk about your OKRs. It's interesting, there's a statistic I share with my audiences that, and this has been validated over the years, that 85% of management teams spend less than an hour a month discussing strategy. So when you think about, people think, well, gosh, I'm constantly in meetings. What are you talking about? Well, we tend to talk about the whirlwind that surrounds us. A metaphor that I use is fog, but you can consider it the pressing business issues, the fires that you have to fight, the operational issues that never go away. That's what most executive teams and management teams spend their time talking about, and strategy kind of gets pushed to the side. But obviously, when we're developing OKRs, we're translating them from your strategies, so we need to talk about them. We want to put them at the center of the agenda. The operational issues are still going to be there. That's obviously important for any organization. but we want to make sure that strategy gets the recognition it's due and is necessary to succeed. So we recommend it. And I'll be honest, not every one of our clients follows this regimen, but I'll lay it out for you because we think it's kind of the ideal state, is a weekly, a mid-quarter, and end-of-quarter meetings. Now, weekly, that's basically just, if you're in the agile world, you might have a daily stand-up. This is fairly similar, but on a weekly basis, just you want to check in on the OKRs. Mainly from a change management aspect, are people still excited about them? They still feel engaged about it. Are there any resource issues that you have to be cognizant of? And maybe even really practical, pragmatic things like just logistics. Who's going to be here this week? Who's away? Is that going to impact our ability to achieve this OKR? I always tell my clients that with OKRs, you're building a muscle. When you go to the gym for the first time, you're not going to grab a big heavy weight and try to press it, 200 pounds 10 times. You get to build up. Same with OKRs, you'll get better over time. And getting into this weekly meeting routine just helps you build the muscle. You're talking about the OKRs and again, building that buy-in and support. So again, it doesn't have to be a formal meeting, doesn't have to be a long meeting, but you're building a discipline. Now, mid-quarter, a little bit more formal, but again, and of course, I can't cite an actual time duration for these meetings because every one of our clients are slightly different, but for a lot of our clients, even at mid-quarter, it's just a couple of hours, maybe 90 minutes just to check in. But 6 weeks in, you should have a pretty decent idea whether or not you're going to achieve the key result. So at this point, if you're not going to achieve the key result, is it a resource issue? Again, maybe you didn't get that assistance from someone else in another department. Is it, maybe a monetary issue? But you want to start going a little deeper and analyzing whether or not you're going to hit your OKRs and what the impediments to hitting them are going to be. And also, though, again, you still want to make sure that everybody is excited about the OKR. You want to make sure that they're engaged. So use that mid-quarter check-in as a chance to again, really get a little bit more formal, a little bit more deep on the OKRs. And it's fascinating that research has indicated that the midpoint of any project is really the most important because people realize, well, half the time is gone, and they kind of put their heads down and say, well, if I'm going to hit this, I really got to focus. So you want to make sure you honor that by actually having the meeting so that people can become cognizant of that fact, that they're halfway through, and to achieve their OKRs, again, they have to put their head down and concentrate and determine what they need to make it happen. End of quarter. Maybe the most important, obviously, the end of quarter retrospective. Here we want to do a couple of things. We want to obviously score the OKRs, talk about our successes, our wins, talk about the challenges for the OKR, and present the OKRs for the next quarter. So here's what we're going to be doing next quarter. We've got a lot of clients to do this in some sort of town hall way because, as you know, Kyle, one of the big benefits of OKRs is transparency. So we want to share, and this is, of course, where software really helps facilitate that. We want to make sure everybody can see the OKRs, and again, we can share what the best practice is. I guess I would say the most important thing about these end of quarter meetings is just have them. It's so easy to let that slide. I often tell clients a story about Alan Mulally, who he worked at Boeing, but then he took over at Ford Motor Company during the height of the financial crisis, I believe in 2007 or 2008. And one of the first things he did was institute a process very similar to OKRs. He called it quarterly business review. And he talks, I read this story in a book called American Icon about his time there at Ford. And he notes the fact that just having these meetings was so important to bring his team together. And he really knew he was making progress at Ford when people weren't afraid to come with red lights. They could show some vulnerability and say, hey, we had a problem here. And, can you give me some help going forward? And just getting that team discussion going. So to have those good discussions, you have to have the meeting. So schedule them in advance, make sure it happens, and hold the meetings. So weekly, mid-quarter, end of quarter meetings. I think they're very important.
So Paul, how do you deal with it if, maybe the executive team is running a little bit behind? And, we talk a lot in OKRs about like top down and bottom up and that sort of thing. And it's tough to do the bottom up if you don't have the next quarter of OKRs from the executive team. So, I guess, how do you keep the executive team honest to make sure that they're planning effectively ahead of time to deliver that town hall message? And, what do you do if you are running a little bit behind there?
I think a lot of it is just pragmatic. Kyle, with our clients, we have an actual timeline that we share with all of our clients that week by week, here's what you should be doing throughout the quarter for OKRs, and you have to build it into the process. Because you're right, the conversations are not going to happen if the next quarter's OKRs haven't been set at the executive level or at the highest team level. So we simply suggest building that in and being very, very disciplined about a timeline and adhering to it. You can't do any of this on an ad hoc basis. You have to actually make sure it happens.
I'm sure that goes back to the executive buy-in too, what being very crucial to get it started.
Right. If you know your executives are taking this seriously, if they're actually willing to engage in things like that. So my last point on this one on best practice in OKRs development is starting small and generating momentum. I think one of the problems I see with OKRs is that people are overly optimistic when they start, and I really applaud that optimism and enthusiasm. We have clients that we work with. They'll go through our training program. They'll think, this is great. I want to write down my OKRs, and they'll write down 5 objectives, each with 5 key results, and suddenly they're managing 25 things, and it's probably too much. And again, having seen a lot of OKRs over the last several years, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Kyle, there's typically a huge improvement from cycle to cycle. One of the comments that we hear a lot from our clients is that this is not as easy as it looks. You think developing OKRs is really easy, but it's tough to write a good OKR. And so when you're starting, don't burden yourself with the pressure of writing 5 really good OKRs. We suggest, even if you're at the team level, or if you're at the individual level, certainly start with 1. That's fine for the first quarter. You can always build into it. Within a few cycles, you might be up to 2 objectives each with a few key results. That's fine, but you want to start small to generate that momentum, because the worst thing that can happen with any kind of change, and OKRs are a change, is that you engage in the change and you fail miserably, and then you say, well, this doesn't work because I failed. But it's not the system, it's not OKRs, it's the way you implemented it. And so give yourself a chance. Small wins, early wins are critical for this. So when you're getting started with OKRs, just 1 OKR is fine to generate that momentum.
Yeah, we deliver that same message from our customer success team, which is that OKRs, it's a mindset, it's a journey. And it's not just something that you check off and you say, I'm going to write 5 OKRs and that's going to make me 50% better, or my company 50% better this quarter. You have to have that kind of agile mindset about constantly improving. And I'm sure it's also tough now, and you're seeing this, I bet, Paul, where the expectations for OKRs have been really inflated based on all the hype coming from books like Measure What Matters and stuff. And so you have to kind of bring people back down to earth about what they can do for you this quarter, but also the big payoff that you get as you build this into your culture and your habits.
Yeah, that's really well said, Kyle. Like, Measure What Matters is a terrific book. We're big fans of it, and it has created a lot of hype. And so, again, this is why you and I are singing from the same songbook here. I think it's just that it's not as easy as it sounds. It sounds easy, and that's one of the huge benefits of it. But you will get better, but you have to start small and build into it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's go forward here, Kyle, because how our OKRs are evolving. This is a kind of a fun part of the presentation today. I think, especially those of you who are listening to who've got some experience with OKRs. For lack of a better word, there's been some dogma that's crept into the OKR world. There's some things that people say you definitely do and you definitely don't. And I'm seeing that being challenged, which I think is a good thing. I love the fact that OKRs are dynamic, and we're learning from users all the time. We're doing more research all the time. So I wanted to talk about 2 things today in particular that I see evolving, and obviously would love feedback from everybody who's listening, and anybody who views the recorded portion of this webinar can contact me to talk about it. But the 2 are OKRs and performance reviews, and OKRs and incentive compensation. So I'll start with OKRs and performance reviews. Again, this is one of the things that, if you read the books and the literature out there, everyone says don't link OKRs to performance reviews. So let's back up a little bit with some background. I would say that virtually all the research that I'm reading now is suggesting that the old way of conducting performance reviews is outdated, and I would say mercifully it's on the way out, right? In that model, a manager and employee, they would sit down once a year, they would discuss the employee's performance during the past 12 months, and that's the key there, the past 12 months. So you're really looking in a rearview mirror, and there's so many problems with that model. Again, focusing on the past instead of the present, and maybe more importantly, the future. There's also, we hear a lot about the stack ranking issue of employees, so that even those who work really hard, they're producing results, they're going to be given relatively poor performance reviews, just because that the organization has to do that, and that of course generates a fight or flight response in people. If you're you're not getting that good review that you hoped for, you're obviously it's very alarming to people. So a lot of problems with the traditional system, but fortunately it's changing. There's definitely a new model. We see a lot of large organizations completely abandoning the old performance review process. And as a lot of you know, and Kyle, I know you know this, the focus now is on more frequent feedback between managers and employees, quarterly, or in some cases even monthly, or maybe more frequently than that, conversations. And no numerical rankings, just discussions that focus mostly on the future. So we're capitalizing on the employees' strengths to guide enhanced performance. And to do this well, though, of course, organizations have to provide some training to their managers on how to structure a conversation like this, the questions to ask, etc. And we think OKRs can play a role in that process. So we're not suggesting that you link OKRs directly to performance reviews. There's more work has to be done on that. But again, we think they can play a part in the process. So just for example, imagine every month, Kyle, if I reported to you, sitting down with you, and you could just ask me, hey, Paul, tell me about an OKR that you worked on this quarter that you were really excited about. You were proud of the results. And that does a couple of things. It increases my engagement because we're having a strategic discussion where I can learn more about the strategy and tell you, about my role in executing it. It gives you a chance to give me any feedback, obviously, on where you think I could have done more or where I might have veered off course in my understanding of the strategy. So that's really, really critical. Also gives me a chance to discuss my next quarter OKR to ensure that there's alignment that we talked about, alignment that around the priorities and expectations that you would have, that the organization has. And there's a really growing body of evidence. It's really exciting to me that conducting these reviews, having these frequent conversations has a number of positive attributes. Maybe the most important one is that it's been shown to increase employee engagement. And I'm excited about that because there's also research that shows that companies that are engaging in OKRs, we're seeing small bumps in engagement. And the numbers are small at this point as far as the number of companies that are engaging in this research, but it's exciting. So again, we're not suggesting an out-and-out link between OKRs and performance reviews, but we are saying you can connect them perhaps. So when you're talking to your employees, just discuss how an OKR they worked on was something that helped them, helped the organization. Use that to inform the discussion. So Kyle, I don't know what your thoughts are on that or what you're seeing. Are you seeing anything similar in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. We're often lumped in. A-Team as a company is often lumped in with a lot of these software products that do continuous performance management. And our perspective on it is that OKRs are fantastic context for these conversations, these performance reviews, continuous coaching conversations, 360 reviews, all that. OKRs are a perfect jumping off point for those conversations. And we also see them as a great way to focus on the results that an employee is creating and not just the activity that they're doing week to week or maybe the personality traits, character traits, those sorts of things. It's really results based, and that's a great. It helps keep those conversations very objective.
Yeah, really well said. So the second one, Kyle, this might be a little bit more controversial. I'll be very curious to see what questions we get from the audience on this one. OKRs and incentive compensation, right? So, and I've got in italics there, overcoming the sandbagging problem. So if you read the literature here in OKRs, the verdict is very clear on this topic. You do not link OKRs to incentive compensation. And the primary rationale for that is, of course, that sandbagging problem. And it's a classic problem. If I'm going to link your OKRs to compensation, Kyle, you're going to say, well, of course, I'll just set the bar really low, and and of course that's antithetical to the whole idea of OKRs, which are supposed to be about stretching and visionary thinking. When you're doing the opposite because you want to achieve a reward, right? So that's the thinking there, setting easily achievable targets in order to ensure an incentive reward. But having said that, of course, and I'm well aware of that, but the landscape is shifting. And I'm actually seeing more and more of my clients link OKRs to incentive compensation. And some would say, and I agree with this, that the sandbagging problem, and hear me out on this, is a bit specious. I don't know if it's as solid as we thought it was. And here's why. I mentioned earlier that OKRs are not set in a vacuum. Of course, first you've got to have that strategic context we talked about. But something we haven't discussed yet, but I think is really important, is that OKRs are negotiation. This is that bottom up that you talked about a minute ago, Kyle. When I develop OKRs, let's say again, Kyle, I report to you. I don't just say, here, Kyle, here are my OKRs, and you rubber stamp them. That's definitely not the way the system works, or not the way it should work. I could certainly draft OKRs. My team can draft OKRs, and if I report to you, we have a discussion, that we have a negotiation where, and that does so many positive things that we've already talked about. It makes sure that you can allay to us what you think are the concerns that you have about what we've had. You can coach us on the level of stretch. You can tell us when we're off target as far as the strategy is concerned, and that increases engagement. All good things come from this negotiation. But perhaps most importantly is you can challenge us on our targets. You could say, gosh, you want to increase the number of new users this quarter by 500. Why not 1,000? Why didn't you come up with 1,000? And so through this negotiation process, I'm not saying that sandbagging can disappear, but I'm kind of saying that, shame on the manager who would let that go through. If you just rubber stamp your subordinates OKRs without doing any kind of coaching, any kind of negotiation, then that's a problem. But on the other hand, if you do what we're talking about, if you have that really in-depth conversation about the targets, about the strategy, and you come to agreement on a target that you both agree is visionary, it's aspirational, but with really hard work, it's doable, then why not link it to compensation? Why not reward employees for that extraordinary effort? So again, I'm seeing more and more of my clients. I had one, I can't name them, but I had one fairly large client recently that we were having this discussion. They just said, well, it's off the table not linking it to compensation. We're doing it right out of the gate. And they did. And they're doing exactly what we're talking about, having these conversations that are so important. So I'm not using this webinar as a soapbox to advocate for this. I am saying, however, don't rule it out. Just because you're reading some of the literature out there that says definitely don't do it, just consider it. It might be right for your organization. It might not be. You might not be at a state now where you're culturally ready for it. But just consider it, and don't close the door completely, is I guess what I would say on this one. Kyle, I'd love to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, we also get that question a lot, and I think you're right, Paul. It is one option on the table as a way to kind of kickstart engagement and get employees and managers more engaged, because a lot of times what we do see is that companies want to create bottom-up types of alignment where they're getting their employees contributing to and their managers deciding on like these key results and what are good measurements for it, but they don't quite have that culture built yet, the habit of employees and managers participating. And so I think by tying it to compensation, that is one option as a way to get them to see that they do have a stake in the outcome of the OKR program.
Yeah, nothing is going to make OKRs more real for employees than saying, hey, we're linking it to your compensation. Yeah, that's going to get everyone's attention immediately. Now, we haven't even talked about, and I'm a bit of a psychology geek, Kyle, so we haven't even talked about the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and there's a whole lot of research that suggests that incentive compensation, of course, is extrinsic. So we'll leave that on the table for another webinar, but again, get small numbers at this point, because this is just something that's, as I mentioned, is evolving, but I'm seeing clients that are having success with this, because as you just said, it really gets people's attention, it gets that buy-in and support, and it fosters those conversations. So I'm excited about seeing where this goes, and perhaps when we have another webinar in several months, we'll have an update.
It's another question along that line, Paul, is do you recommend this for companies who are brand new to OKRs, or going back to the learning curve, it seems like they may want to do a few rounds of OKRs before they start linking these compensation OKRs?
Really terrific point, Colin. An important one. Thanks so much for bringing that up. Yeah, I would, again, although I have clients who do it right out of the gate, I would suggest exercising a little caution. Again, as I mentioned, having reviewed thousands of OKRs, the increase in just the ability to write a good OKR from quarter to quarter is astounding to me, how people get better at it. So I would be very wary about linking my initial OKRs to compensation, because I just know they're going to get better. People just, setting targets and key results is not easy. It's definitely more of an art than a science, and you will get better at it. So this is something I would say approach with caution, but consider it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
All right, well, we have one component left in our webinar, and then happy to answer any questions that people have. And we're calling this the new OKRs tips, tricks, and hacks. So got just a few of these that I want to share with people. And again, forgive me, some of these are going to seem fairly pedantic, but I'm giving you the benefit of my experience here, again, having seen so many OKRs. The first one is, whenever possible, please try to follow a standard template, if you will, or format for writing OKRs. This will help you as an organization too. One of the problems I see with my clients is that when I review their OKRs, they're just very inconsistently written. And that makes it hard, I think, for that transparency that we talked about. When people are using totally different formats, it's hard to see the benefits of transparency and understand what their ultimate intention was. So this is what we suggest. Very simple. You'll probably see this from a lot of OKRs practitioners out there. For the objective, start with a verb, obviously. Then what is it you specifically want to do? And then perhaps the most important part is the third, in order to, or so that, or why. That last part is the business impact. Why are you engaging in this activity? What is it going to do? We want to increase attendance at our user meeting to grow a network of users, to grow our network. It could be anything, but that last part is really important, because especially when you get to your key result, that's what you're really going to want to measure, is the business impact from the OKR. So verb plus what plus in order to or so that.
Paul,
when you write a key result.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt you there, but the in order to so that, I do see that's very important. Is that how you kind of link the strategy context back to the OKR?
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. That when you think about the verb and the what, those are really kind of activities, but the in order to or so that, that's, yeah, well said, Kyle. That's the link back to the strategy. So when I'm looking at people's OKRs, their objectives, I really, that's the first thing I look at, is the business impact, because I know that's the most strategic part of the OKR, and that's what my executives and managers who are working with OKRs and reviewing others in their organization, they're saying the same thing. That okay, I want to see what the business impact here, and then I kind of back into the verb and the what are kind of the activity that's going to lead to that. So yeah, really nice catch there. Thanks, Kyle. For the key result, very similar format, verb plus what plus from X to Y. And that last part is very important, the X to Y. This would be considered what we call a metric key result. So increase attendance at our conference from 500 to 1,000. And we always want to have that X to Y, because that provides a baseline. If I just said increase attendance at our user conference to 1,000, well, if attendance last year was 950, that's not much of a stretch. And again, we want to have that negotiation, that stretch. So whenever possible, write them from X to Y. Now, there are different types of key results. Sometimes we have what we call milestone key results, and I'll talk about those in just a minute with another one of our bullets. But for them, we would just want to include a date, and produce the new report and have it approved by X date. But the important thing is just to follow this format. If you don't like this format, that's fine. Find one that works for you, but use it consistently. Again, don't write sloppy OKRs. This will be a real, for those of managers who are reviewing your OKRs and to increase transparency, a consistent format is enormously helpful. Second point, this is something that I read, that book, Checklist Manifesto. I'm sure many of you have read it over the last several years. Great book. I'm a huge fan of checklists, and so I've started creating checklists for my clients. Of course, we train our clients in OKRs, and we have a lot of documentation. I think I have a couple of clients listening today, and they're nodding their heads at that. But we also provide them with very simple checklists to give to people. So especially if you're new to OKRs, we encourage you to, read my book, of course, John Doerr's book. I shouldn't say just mine and Ben Lamort book. But when you're actually sitting down and drafting OKR, sometimes you don't want to be flipping through 10 pages of text. So we provide people with checklists. Just, here's a good objective, should be doable in the time period. It should provide business value. It should be qualitative. It should be controllable by the team. All of these things, just so people are cognizant of that, and they can literally say, okay, does my objective hit all those? What about my key result? Is it quantitative? Is it attainable? Is it visionary? Is it dysfunctional in any way? Is it going to lead to some kind of bad behavior that we don't want? Just a really nice diagnostic on your OKR. And again, we provide these with our clients, but if you're not a client of ours, you can create one very, very easily, and just it will help your team help themselves. So don't overlook the simplicity, but the latent and inherent power of checklists.
I think, Paul, right there, that's an area where we struggle on software too, because one of the things, it's kind of a pro and a con of software. Software does a really good job of specifying workflows, which are in many ways like checklists or like these templates that you're talking about. But then on the other side, it doesn't work universally for everybody. Every company is a little bit different. So that's where, maybe configuration comes in, but it's a balancing act that we run into at A-Team. It's just like, how do we specify just enough to keep people on track and teach them good habits, but not too much that we constrain their ability to run a program that fits their company.
Right. No, very good, Kyle. That's exactly right. So my next bullet here is an interesting one and a new one. I see one of the things I've seen a lot in reviewing, again, a lot of OKRs is there's a preponderance of milestone key results. This is especially the case with organizations that are new to OKRs. They come up with something that I really love to do this, but they've never done it before. So it's, I'm going to, like, for example, a good example is employee engagement. Some of our smaller organizations, they're growing really quickly. They want to make sure they keep their team engaged and excited, but they've never measured employee engagement before. We see this a lot with our startups and smaller clients. And so we'll see a lot of key results like, find a vendor for an employee engagement survey, administer the survey. Well, that's all great. That's really important. But the business value here that they want, and typically if you look at the objective, it will be representative of that, is they want to increase employee engagement or they want to maintain it over time. So they're not actually measuring that with these milestone key results. So we suggest you simply have what we call a carry forward key result. So perhaps in Q1, you're going to choose the type of employee engagement survey you want to administer, whether it's Gallup Q12 or anything else out there. You're going to actually administer the survey to a random sample of your employees. That's all you can perhaps do in 90 days. But you're going to carry forward a key result for the next quarter that says we're going to actually measure our employee engagement. So you don't forget about the business impact. I don't push back on my clients with milestone key results. I think they're definitely an important part of OKRs, but you have to make sure you're measuring the actual business impact. So just because you can't measure it in the current quarter, the current 90 days, that doesn't preclude you from including that key result. Just carry it forward. So note it down and say, we can't measure this in the current period, but we're going to carry it forward to the next quarter. What I don't want to do is let people off the hook for their OKR. So this is something new we've been using with our clients and we're getting good feedback on it. So I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, Paul, that one sounds great. Actually, I'm sure this applies a lot to like product and engineering too, where you're delivering projects, but then they're meant to drive some sort of business outcome once they're released.
Yeah, definitely product engineering teams, Kyle. But again, we're seeing with teams across the organizations because again, there's just so many milestone key results.
Yeah.
So another thing you're going to see in the literature, I keep coming back to that theme here, is that tasks are not key results, and some people out there in the OKR world write quite vehemently about that. And I agree to a point, as we'll see, right? So if your key result is I'm going to email a sales prospect, or I'm going to meet with the new VP of HR, anything you can do in an hour or in 5 minutes in the case of an email is really not a key result. That's not something that's going to stretch you. It's probably not going to ultimately add a ton of business value. It's more task related. So and believe me, if you're new to OKRs, that's an easy lever to pull. Just like, oh well, gosh, on my to-do list I have to do these 10 things. Those are my key results. That's a great place to start. But if you find yourself coming up with a lot of task-related key results, just ask yourself, why am I engaging in the task? If I do this task, what will happen? Right? That will help you get to better key results. But I do think tasks can be a part of the process for several reasons. One of the things we challenge our clients to do is when you write your key results, write down the key tasks or activities necessary to achieve that key result. And that's important for a number of reasons. Let's say you have a key result and you write down 20 tasks. Well, right away, that's a good diagnostic. Are you, realistically going to be able to achieve that key result in the time period if you've got 20 associated tasks? Maybe not. It's a great diagnostic. It helps you plan your work. I mentioned weekly meetings a few moments ago. Well, sometimes you're not going to see progress necessarily on your key result week to week, but you can definitely see progress on your tasks. So it gives you something to talk about to keep key results and OKRs top of mind. So that's really important. It's a great way to plan your work as well. I know everything I practice, I preach, I use OKRs, and I document my task lists. I chronologically over the 12-week period, I use quarterly OKRs, and it helps me plan my week. So if I'm not at a client and I'm going to be here at my home office where I am today, then I can be working on those tasks that are related to key results. Helps me plan my work. So again, with so much with OKRs, it's growing so fast. You've got people out there writing things that I think sometimes you have to be wary of and just really consider. And the fact that tasks are not key results, I agree with, but they can be part of the process.
Yeah, we see that same thing, Paul, which is a lot of key results, especially for first-time companies doing OKRs. They do look like tasks, and they always struggle with trying to separate the two in their mind.
Right, exactly. And again, just keep asking, why am I engaging in that task? What will happen if I achieve the task? You'll come to a better key result.
And your first point helps a lot too there, which is follow the template. If you got that template, it's harder to
right.
task into that key result bucket.
Exactly. Good. Well, last bullet here, and then I want to leave a little time for questions. So I'm a big fan of the work of a gentleman named Alan Fine. Alan wrote a great book that I recommend to everyone called You Already Know How to Be Great. I've had a chance to work with Alan a little bit. And he used an acronym for coaching that it's called GROW. And so I'm borrowing a little bit from this for OKRs. And again, I encourage you to look at Alan's work. But in the GROW model, G stands for goal. So what is your goal? So, in applying this to OKRs, we could say our goal is our objective, or maybe even our key result. Now, it's the R that I want to talk about in Alan's model. In Alan's model, the R stands for reality. And I'll expand that a little bit and I'll say current reality. And I'm drawing on Alan's acronym here because I see so many OKRs from people that are new to this that, to be honest, they're not realistic in the time frame. And again, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade. If you're new to OKRs, you're excited about it, you're going to write, and again, the literature all says, be visionary, think big with OKRs. But I encourage you to examine the current reality of where you are with that objective right now. And you might have to kind of like chunk it in half, chunk it, maybe even more for the first quarter. Just be realistic, because again, the last thing we want to do is demoralize you with OKRs that you can never achieve. So that R in the GROW Up model, I think, is so important. What is your current reality? The O, of course, stands for options. So, what if our current reality is miles away from where we want to be with our goal? How can we attack it? Maybe, what's a potential smaller objective that we could achieve in the next 90 days that will help us get to ultimately where we want to go? And the W stands for way forward. So we could suggest that is our final OKR. The way forward is what we choose. But I love that acronym. It's a great book, by the way. You already know how to be great. And I'm picking on the R in GROW. So when you're developing an OKR for the first time, really challenge yourself to consider, where am I with that realistically? What can I do in the next 90 days? You might have to chunk it down a little bit.
Yeah, that's great advice. I really love that, the realism. All right. So that was amazing, Paul. Thank you so much for the presentation. I know I've already seen some questions piling up here. So how about I just read through some and I'll throw them your way and you can answer them. Does that sound good?
That's terrific. Thanks, Kyle.
All right. So the first one I see here is common one I've heard before is, how is a key result different than a standard KPI?
Yeah. Right. So I'm drawing a deep breath on that. We can take the rest of our time on that one, right? But well, for one thing, it's a matter of terminology, right? So one of the problems I see in the corporate performance management world, and I'll use an umbrella term for what we're doing here, is that we're awash in terminology, right? So and so for some organizations, there might not be any difference because there's not really a standard definition of a KPI. But here's how I would differentiate the two. I would consider a key performance indicator more operational in nature, whereas OKRs are more strategic. So if you're monitoring production on the production floor every single day, you might need instant operational data that confirms whether or not everything is working smoothly. I would consider those KPIs, like just key performance indicators. Whereas your OKRs, again, they should be translated from your strategy. OKRs work typically in a 90-day cadence, so a little longer term. So that's how I would distinguish them. But I guess my broader point there is just, this is advice I give all my clients too, is when you're starting an OKR program, develop a glossary. Because there is probably a lot of terminology floating around your organization, and the last thing you want to do is confuse people with more terms. So actually write it out. So in our organization, an objective means X, key result is Y, KPI means Z. You have to do that. So so just document what you mean by your terms.
Yeah, but if you want to align your objectives, you also have to align your terminology, the way you're talking about it.
Right. Yeah.
All right, we have another one here around carrying forward key results, but this person's asking, do you ever carry key results downwards in the sense, not forward in time, but down towards like supporting teams and supporting, roles? Maybe turn an objective. Turn it into an objective.
Yeah. Right. Yes, you could see that. So in the classic cascading model that is presented in the OKR world, it's again, Kyle, if I report to you, your key result becomes my objective. That's classic cascading. Whoever wrote that, you might be interested. I just wrote a blog. It's posted on LinkedIn where I said your key result is not necessarily necessarily my objective. So it can happen. Now, the obvious area where that would work really well is sales. So again, if I'm the general manager of sales, we want to have sales of $10 million this quarter. Hey, Eastern region, you're 5 million, Western region, you're 3 million, et cetera, et cetera. It works really well that way. But for most of us, it's a bit like, putting the old square peg in a round hole. It might not translate completely. So possibly, I guess is my answer there. But what we really focus on is influence. So, again, if I report to you, Kyle, I look at your OKRs, I look at the company's OKRs and say, what can I do to influence that? What's my unique contribution? So, John Doerr, I think his book talks about loose coupling. So I would say, think more about that. Think more about influence and contribution than direct cascading.
Yeah, it's funny. We have, in the A-Team software, we have alignment and cascading. And the advice I often give on that is just because there's a feature called alignment doesn't mean that's the only way you create alignment. Some of it is just being right. Transparency. Some of it is like that visual alignment of understanding how you contribute to things.
Exactly. Good.
We have one here asking, can you elaborate on how you extract company level OKRs from strategy?
Sure. Yeah. Again, that could be a whole other podcast, or webinar. But I think if you go all the way back to my introduction, you saw that I've done a lot of work in the balanced scorecard field. So I take a principle from the balanced scorecard. It's called strategy maps. And the questioner who asked that, if you just Google strategy maps, you'll find a lot of information, or you can visit my website as well. But strategy maps are a really powerful tool. And what they do is they challenge organizations, especially at the highest level, to break down their strategy into 4 what we call perspectives. So if you're going to execute your strategy, what does it mean financially? What would that look like? In order to achieve financial results, what customer markets are you going after, and how are you going to service them effectively? What do you have to do well internally as a company? And then lastly, what intangible assets are going to drive your success, whether it's employee skills or the IT infrastructure you use or the culture of the organization. That's kind of classic balanced scorecard. And I don't advise that at the team level because it can become a bit of a tick the box exercise looking at all these areas of your business. But at the company level, it's extremely effective way to develop company level OKRs is to use that 4 perspective format. And you could have more perspectives if you want, but it makes sure that you're telling a cohesive and really comprehensive story of your business's success. So that's how we work with our clients in developing corporate level OKRs. We take them through this framework to make sure that they're not overlooking any aspect of their business.
What do you think, maybe this is a question for me, but how much time should be spent on the corporate versus the team? Do you think that the corporate is just the most important thing, or do you think it's also important just that you get them written down and then shown to the teams so the teams can do the bottom up alignment?
Yeah, no, they're critical, Kyle. So just for example, in our consulting engagements with our clients, we typically spend an entire day building those corporate OKRs. Now, sometimes we're time crunched with clients, and so sometimes we just don't get that much time. But ideally, we guide them through an entire days long workshop to develop those corporate OKRs because they're critical. They provide the context for everything else. So if you want transparency, if you want engagement, if you want alignment, if you want accountability, you have to have those corporate OKRs to provide the context. So it's extremely important, and it's not something to be taken lightly.
Absolutely. We have maybe we have time for one last question here. I'm going to try to interpret this one, but how do you separate OKRs from maybe individual performance goals? Things about like personal development goals, or how do those fit together?
Yeah. Right. That's a very, very good, interesting question, especially if we're seeing OKRs kind of leak into the performance review space. But where I would say the differentiation there is that individual performance goals can be maybe more tactical, like hey Paul, you need more selling skills, go out and take a sales course. That's not really an OKR. The sales course is not the OKR, but maybe how I apply that in my work, like hey, have my sales gone up? I've been doing more sales calls. That's the business outcome of that. So that's how I differentiate the two. The individual performance goals again could tend to be a little bit more tactical, whereas the OKRs we hope are strategic in showing your contribution and the business impact you provide with that contribution.
Awesome. I love that answer. All right. I think that's about all the time we have, and we answered a lot of the key questions there. So Paul, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. A lot of terrific information. I'm sure everybody listening today really appreciated it. I know I did.
Great. Pleasure was mine, Kyle. Thanks for having me on.
All right. And guys, if you need any more information, we will be sending out this webinar as a recording afterwards to all attendees. If you have any questions, you can message us at hello@ateam.com. We actually just did a summary of Paul's book, Paul and Ben's book, Objectives and Key Results, which has, I'm sure, a lot of this same information in the summary, but we'd recommend you also just pick up the book from Amazon or something. It's a great read. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.